I first want to thank Piesmomo for this invitation and organizing the Peace University course. Deeper understandings of peace are desperately needed to walk forward in the midst of entrenched conflicts, both in daily life and at the global scale. I want to give a quick introduction of myself and the organization I work with. My name is Jennifer Diebert, and I serve as the DPRK Program Director with American Friends Service Committee. I have been working with humanitarian programs in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, what some call North Korea, since 2016. During my time, I've been able to travel to DPRK many times and work with exchange programs that brought DPRK agricultural scientists out of DPRK and agricultural scientists from other countries into the DPRK. I also lived in Chuncheon, Gangwon Province from 2014 to 2021 and experienced many winters in what some call Chunberyo. The American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, was founded in 1917 to provide opportunities for alternative service for conscientious objectors during World War I. AFSC promotes a world free of violence, inequality, and oppression. As a US-based NGO, in this lecture I will focus more on recommendations to the US, but as we see, the crises we are facing today are not bound to any single country. And I want to open with a brief story. I come from a small town in Central California known for a few things: agriculture and heat, in particular very hot, dry summers. Since moving back to the US, I've also become a part-time organic vegetable farmer. In farming, we pay very close attention to the weather. Too cold in the spring and the blossoms are damaged, too hot in the spring and the plants become stressed. Usually I could harvest tomatoes from June to October, with the last days of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit weather in August. And not so this year. The heat stayed for many, many days and the plants were slow to ripen, and the last weeks of really hot weather lasted until late September. Every year, we're breaking a new record. In Seoul this summer, we also saw devastating rains, another weather record. Every year, we hear now of more records being broken, and not the kind that most of us are particularly interested in breaking. The Korean Peninsula has seen record rainfall and increasingly long and severe typhoon seasons, as well as increasingly long periods of drought. My hometown is experiencing more severe heat and longer periods without rain. These are not the kinds of records we celebrate, and this is global in scale. A Chinese colleague recently shared the Chinese saying, "Among the dangers and risks, we see opportunity." And today I want to talk about the crisis and the opportunity. We'll first start with the problem and some ways of understanding the current crisis. There is no shortage of examples to illustrate the challenges facing the planet we all live on. I want to turn then to the opportunities among the crisis and what we can do as citizens and civil societies, including actions we can take as individuals and diplomatic opportunities. To frame the current crisis, I want to draw on the work of the Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University. They developed the concept of the 9 planetary boundaries that regulate the stability and resilience of the Earth system. Climate change is, of course, one of these boundaries, but there are many other parts of the system that need to be within defined boundaries to maintain a stable Earth. The planet, as humanity has known it for the last millennia, has allowed human life to thrive through agriculture and building of large civilizations. This era is known as the Holocene era, and the planetary boundaries are a method scientists use to quantify the different aspects of Earth environment that allow for the Holocene conditions. When the boundaries are exceeded, it means that we are headed towards trouble, towards a planet that will be less hospitable to life as we see it today. The diagram shows 9 boundaries and the results of scientific assessments of the current status. Sobering, isn't it? In 2022 alone, we have passed beyond the safe operating zone for 2 boundaries: the introduction of novel entities and green water. And just to note that we likely exceeded these boundaries before 2022, but they were first quantified by teams of scientists in 2022. And I want to take a minute to explain a bit further about these two in particular. Novel entities include anything wholly created by human activities that does not occur in nature. This includes plastics, industrial chemicals, chemicals in consumer products, antibiotics, and other pharmaceuticals. The effects, especially the long-term effects of these entities, are largely unknown on Earth, and their interactions within the world systems are not fully known. As the report states, some of these pollutants can be found globally, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, and can be extremely persistent. We have overwhelming evidence of negative impacts on Earth systems, including biodiversity and biogeological cycles. Global production and consumption of novel entities is set to continue to grow. The total mass of plastics on the planet is now over twice the mass of all living mammals, and roughly 80% of all plastics ever produced remain in the environment. Plastics contain over 10,000 other chemicals, so their environmental degradation creates new combinations of materials and unprecedented environmental hazards. Production of plastics is set to increase, and predictions indicate the release of plastic pollution to the environment will rise too, despite huge efforts in many countries to reduce waste. And the modest efforts of replacing plastic straws with paper and reducing single-use plastic bags are important steps, but we need a larger cultural shift toward a circular economy where goods and chemicals are designed to be reused and recycled. The second boundary quantified for the first time and identified as breached is what is termed green water. Green water is the water available to plants, generally soil moisture. The water system has been fundamentally shifting with less water available to plants in the soil. And for me, this feels very personal. The land I come from produces about a quarter of all produce in the US, much of this exported, and the sole producer of 17 commodities, including almonds, walnuts, pistachios, olives, plums, and garlic. A quick trip to the grocery store in Seoul, and I found all these from California as well. Almonds, walnuts, pistachios, prunes, wine, grapes, oranges, and what happens when there's simply no water? With a decline in worldwide soil moisture, we can no longer hope for a wet year to make up for a few dry years, or that building more dams will mean more water. What we are witnessing is not just a drought, it's aridification, the process of the land drying out and losing water, and land without water does not grow almonds and grapes. One only has to open the world news to see the consequences from the climate crisis touch every country. However, the largest climate polluting countries, generally higher income countries, are not taking the quick action needed to halt emissions. There is one point I would like to tease out that relates directly to the context in Northeast Asia, the connection between militarism and the climate crisis. As a citizen of the country with the largest armed forces budget in the world, I will focus on the US military, in particular in Northeast Asia. The history of US military presence in Northeast Asia is long and ongoing. The US has approximately 28,000 soldiers stationed in South Korea and an estimated 50,000 troops in Japan. The United States Department of Defense released a report in 2021 detailing how climate change is affecting the armed forces of the United States. The Secretary of Defense wrote, "There is little about what the department does to defend the American people that is not affected by climate change." While the report details how the military will respond to the effects of climate change, the report does not address the military as a driver of climate change. The statistics on the US military's contribution to driving climate change is difficult to measure because of the lack of transparency. Only taking into account the fuel used for vehicles and aircraft, if the US military were a nation state, it would rank 47th in the world. That's just fuel for moving airplanes and vehicles, not operating and maintaining infrastructure or the harm to wildlife and biodiversity. Reducing conflict then becomes an urgent issue to solve climate change and of national defense. When the Secretary says there is little about what the department does to defend the American people that does not affect climate change, he is relating the vision of defense held by the US and most militaries of how national security is achieved through the armed forces. But what happens to this vision of security when the greatest threat to life and national security cannot be defended against with weapons? What happens when the very weapons meant to keep a country safe are hastening the demise? There is no weapon a country can possess that will protect people from the effects of climate change. All countries, no matter their economic status or the size of the army, can outmaneuver the climate crisis. In fact, the armed forces whose stated mission is to keep a country safe are actually speeding up the processes that are contributing to ever-increasing environmental threats, the US military being the most egregious polluter. The most useful thing the US could do to protect its people is to immediately halt all testing and military exercises, to stop moving people and planes around the world. Not only will this benefit the US, but it will benefit all of humanity. We need a fundamental shift in how we see security, one that includes non-human threats and takes into account how human activity is pushing closer to a planet that is not conducive to human life. There is an important example of this vision in Northeast Asia, in Mongolia's journey to become a nuclear weapons-free state that provides hope for how visionary leadership can alter a country's vision of how to create and maintain security and stability. Mongolia is a landlocked country sharing a long border to the north with Russia and a long border to the south with China. It's a large country, rich in mineral resources, with a population of about 1.3 million and the fewest people per square kilometer. Mongolia transitioned from a socialist state to a democracy in 1990, with a new constitution taking effect in 1992. Mongolian leadership saw their best path towards security was not through joining the arms race for deterrence, but rather to disarm and achieve peace through political and diplomatic means. To that end, Mongolia became the first country to declare a single-state nuclear weapons-free zone. The road to realizing this vision of peace and security was long. In 1992, Mongolia declared this status in the United Nations General Assembly. The United Nations Assembly adopted the resolution in 1998 with the P5, or 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, adopting a joint statement in 2000 and a joint declaration in 2012. The example of leadership provided by this process gives me hope that there are other leaders with a broader vision who can lead the way to a world where peace and security are achieved through cooperation and dialogue, not through weapons and war. Personally, I hope my country can follow this vision before it is too late. This new vision of security must take into account the unfolding climate crisis and a coordinated international response to cooperation around stopping and reversing the effects of climate change. In a poll commissioned by American Friends Service Committee and conducted by YouGov, the majority of the US population supported defunding the military to invest instead in human needs when framed as a choice between investment in the armed forces and investment in human needs like food, water, and housing. So why then is the US military so well funded if the US public would rather invest in human needs? Well, for one, it's rarely framed as a choice between the two. The choice is presented as a foregone conclusion that the only way to achieve peace is through military options and not through diplomacy and dialogue. The effects of the climate crisis show that this is indeed a choice between the two. Investing in military solutions to complex problems is accelerating the degradation of the environment and causing adverse effects on the most basic human needs of food, water, and shelter. Yet within this crisis, there is also opportunity. The spaces for diplomacy seem to be shrinking, with tensions rising between countries in Northeast Asia and also with the US, especially the relationship between the US and the DPRK and the US and China. Working together on halting climate change is an opportunity within the crisis. Condoleezza Rice, a former Secretary of State, said, "We need a common enemy to unite us." The US has found many enemies in attempts to unite the country. A quick stroll through history reveals many candidates for enemies, and the DPRK is often cited as a special case, often the subject of special measures. A few of these are the travel ban that prohibits US citizens from using a US passport to travel to the DPRK, and the recent ban on anti-personnel landmines everywhere in the world except in Korea. The US is experiencing increasing polarization politically and socially, with the pandemic only widening the gaps. Military spending is one place we are seeing the US public opinion supporting a different path forward. In the same poll as I cited already, 56% of US adults supported cutting Pentagon spending and reinvesting those funds in programs that benefit everyone. When framed as a choice, either investing in military or human needs, the will of the people is to invest in human needs. The climate crisis reveals that it is indeed a choice between accelerating climate change or investing in solutions. Another spark of hope I see is the potential for dialogue around climate concerns. One example of the benefits of sustained dialogue is the US-China strategic and economic dialogues, which met regularly between 2009 and 2016. In an extensive review of the dialogues undertaken by the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, the sustained dialogues, both high level and working level, contributed greatly in several areas, including energy and climate change. The report states, "Energy and climate change was a particularly productive area of the S&ED because each side prioritized bilateral developments on these topics. The pattern of interaction followed a general trajectory of the S&ED as China's economy developed in the period of 2010 to 2016. Outcomes moved over time from statements of principle and agency to agency MOUs to announcements of regularized dialogues to concrete projects and measurable progress on the initial objectives." In short, energy and climate change were areas in which relationships and collaborations snowballed over time, not one in which an early harvest of low-hanging fruits led to stagnation or disillusionment with the value of the process to discernible progress. In addition to the progress made on energy and climate change, the dialogues created space for both sides to better understand how the systems of the other functioned that laid the foundation for further dialogues. This is also backed up by polling results from 2022. 57% of US adults agreed that the US should engage in dialogue with China and reduce spending that would undermine talks. And most respondents agreed that the US government should engage in dialogue with China as much as possible to reduce tensions while also cutting any spending that would undermine those efforts. That's compared to only 21% who felt that the US government should not restart talks with China and instead spend more money on military buildup, with 22% responding they didn't know. This pattern of engagement and dialogue could serve as a helpful model for a dialogue process between the US and DPRK. Dialogues around the climate crisis would serve the interest of both the US and DPRK. The DPRK has publicly stated the importance of addressing the effects of climate change, and it is an area of mutual concern. This could serve as a starting point for more difficult topics in the future and build mutual understanding of the values of each party. The DPRK has declared war on deforestation, and this is an opening to join in cooperation with the DPRK to tackle a common problem of global deforestation. The DPRK has engaged with civil societies and other organizations on climate change and environmental concerns, and this could also serve as an opening to begin sustained dialogues. One key barrier that will need to be removed before any progress can be made is sanctions. Currently, the US sanctions against DPRK are among the most restrictive and comprehensive, with carve-outs only for food and medicine, while other humanitarian activities require special licensing. This licensing can take anywhere from months to years. Even academic exchanges with US institutions and universities would require special permission. The success of the China dialogues was in the ability to implement projects both at the private and governmental level. Concrete outcomes were achieved through concrete action. In order for dialogues with the DPRK around climate change to produce concrete outcomes and actions, the current sanctions regime will need to be amended to allow for cooperation around climate concerns like deforestation, conservation, and water management. And I started this lecture with the climate boundaries and looking at the places where we are failing and need urgent action. Some countries, like my own country, the US, have outsized roles in contributing to the crisis, and it is incumbent upon us to push for change. And I want to end with hope, and I want to point us again to the example of Mongolia and the vision of security through diplomacy. We urgently need leaders with the vision to find a path forward based on cooperation and well-being of people. And when we join together, the possibilities for change and solving pressing problems give me hope. And we cannot afford to wait.